We're going to go ahead and begin. Good morning again. It's almost afternoon, actually. I know I did the welcome this morning, but I really can't ever start a session without saying thank you. I just think it's incredibly important that we develop ourselves as counselors, and I think it's incredibly important that you set aside time for professional development. I know that we maxed out and we had a wait list, and we also have people live streaming, so I understand that this is a rare opportunity for counselors to get together. I was talking to my husband over the weekend, who's a principal, and I said, this is a free conference in the state for counselors, and this is a huge opportunity. And so I just want you to know I'm thankful that you're here, and I also just get excited to see all of you in a room. And I don't necessarily ever like these large sessions because I like to go around and everybody tell me who you are and where you're from and all that good stuff, but I can't do that in this large session, so I'm really sad about that. But I will tell you one thing. Earlier I said our Director of Prevention Services had to run away to a meeting real quick, but she returned. So Elizabeth, will you stand just a second? This is Elizabeth Sedeth, and she is our Director of Prevention Services. And so she started with us a few weeks ago. And if you remember from last year, the Director of Prevention Services had a lot of webinars and other professional development provided for you. And so Elizabeth and I are going to get right on that. Right. Yes, we're working on that now. So we are working on our crisis trainings across the state, so that's kind of what's taken our focus for now. This is kind of funny to me. So there is one person in this room who knows me from high school, and that's my English teacher who's sitting right here. That's Miss Boomer. And what's funny is I decided during the last session that I was going to change this presentation. And I was like, this is so crazy. And then I thought, well, you know what nobody in this room is going to know what I was voted my senior year as, like most likely to whatever. It wasn't to succeed. But that was probably pretty obvious to most people. But I will say, I was voted something, and I'm not going to put Miss Boomer on the spot. She's not going to remember what it was because it was a few years ago. But I was voted most spontaneous. And so apparently I'm still living up to it because I want to change my entire presentation right now. So I told Marty, I said, I'm not going to put it up there because I'm going to totally go off script. And my title as generic is Counselor Update. So I get to do that because I'm just updating you within the last 30 minutes what's going on. So I know typically when I came to the Counselor Update, a lot of times it was new legislation, a lot of changes. In the past couple of years, it's also focused on testing and how things have changed. I think that's very important information. Do not get me wrong. What I want to talk to you about today is what I find to be very important, which is the update in the counseling field and in our state, but also in how to be a counselor advocate. So I guess what I'm saying is I want to talk to you today about the things going on, but mostly for me, the update today and the update for you guys is that I'm new to this position, so everything's an update, actually. I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself. I'm going to tell you a little bit about where we are in the counseling department, at the State Department, and then I hope at the end I can hear just a little bit from you guys, like literally just a few things about what you think needs to come in the future. So we got a lot going on in education right now. And so I want to honor that. To tell you a little bit about myself, raise your hand if you get my newsletter, the Counselor Engaged newsletter. Okay, so some of you. I am an alternatively certified school counselor, and I have been in school counseling, I say 9.5, 10 years. There was kind of like two wonky periods of my career. I started out at a career tech doing some employment specialist stuff, and then I went into elementary counseling for a couple years, and then was like, no, I think I want to go clinical. So then I went to a community agency, and I was like, no, I'm supposed to be in schools. So I quickly jumped back into schools. And so I say 9.5, 10 years. I came to this position the last week in November just a couple months ago. So I left a school in the middle of the year, and I accepted this job in September, and my principal said, okay, I understand, we'll release you from your contract as long as you stay here until somebody's hired. And I was like, okay. So I stayed for 8 weeks at Norman High School. At Norman High School, I was the student advocacy coordinator. So what I did there was I focused on advocating for students who had experienced bullying, harassment, sexual assault, and other types of trauma. So I tell you that because my mindset of what's going on in high schools, middle schools, and elementaries across the state is a lot of trauma focused. I have been noticing over the past couple of years that the conversation about how do we support our students who've experienced trauma, the conversation keeps growing. More people are asking, not just our Title I schools, or not just that school over there, but all of our schools. Our high-functioning schools are asking about how to support their kids in trauma. We're seeing more and more crisis in schools, in our high schools and in our middle schools, and things that we as counselors, we want to be there and we want to help our kids, but how do we also train our entire school to help support our kids and all that they're going through? So that's really where my heart is. And the reason I say that is because I believe that the school counselor position is one that is founded on the three main points of school counseling. And I find that there can be a balance, and there should be a balance, when we're able to do that, and we have the support to do that. And that's our social emotional growth, our academic advisement, and then also our career development. So if you were in the last session, we talked about ICAP. And there's another ICAP session. So that one was live streamed if you need to go back to it. So ICAP's really focusing on that career development component. So when I came into office, I was like, you know what? The first thing I'm going to do is we're going to update our comprehensive plan. Anybody know when the last time it was updated? Throw out a year. 93? Okay. Anyone else? I have no prizes if you win. I'll smile for you. 2004. 2004 was the last time it was updated. So I'm no mathematician, but that's 14 years. And that's a long time. And I'm not, before I came into this position, I'm not going to lie, I didn't know it had been that long. It was about 2 months before I came into the position that I realized it, and I thought, oh yeah, that's got to be priority number one. And it is priority number one. But what I'm doing is not jumping into it without being ready. So the first thing is that I'm using that ICAP counselor toolkit advisement group. It's got a long name. They just call it the cadre. There are 10 any counselors in that group in this room today? It's the ICAP pilot schools this year. There's a 10 counselor cadre. No, there's no. Okay. So what they're doing is there's 10 counselors that are meeting weekly. They're taking the ASCA advisement course, and by July-ish, they're going to have a toolkit available that will later be available to all of you guys for your ICAP process. And so I am not leading it. 10 counselors that are in a building working day to day with their kids, they're the ones writing it, and they're the ones leading it. And so I'm using that opportunity to really see how they're working together. They do online meetings, they do some web chats, and they will meet in person a couple times. And they're also using Google Drive to share documents and create new documents and things like that. And so I'm kind of looking at the process to see how I can do that to write our comprehensive plan. And we're not going to start from scratch with our comprehensive plan. We're going to revise it because there's some things in it that are still very relevant to what we're doing today. But there are things that need to be updated. So I wanted to get that out there first so you guys know that is something that's a priority to me in this office, and that is something that will happen in the near future. With ICAP, we're kind of using this, the career advisement, career development part first. One of the things you'll learn about me is basically every single time you ever hear me speak or talk or breathe, I mention Brene Brown. Raise your hand if you know Brene Brown. Thank goodness. I have more people to influence. You need to get to know Brene Brown. So write that down. Everybody pick up your pen or pencil and write it down. Brene Brown is a researcher and professor and author and speaker and an amazing human being, if you ask me. She's from the University of Houston. She researches shame, vulnerability, guilt, all that fun stuff that everybody likes to talk about. So I always come with either a quote, a video, something from her because she's amazing. So today's quote is, "You can choose courage or you can choose comfort, but you cannot choose both." And the reason I wanted to mention that today is where we're at in counseling and where we're at in education is a lot of times comfort's easy, right? We can just do it. This is what I've been doing. I want to continue to do it. Or we can use, that thing inside of us that kind of chokes us up sometimes called courage. And we can use that to continue to develop and to change and to grow. And that's what I hope we do as far as in my office, but then also I hope for you guys. Because when I first started hearing about ICAP, and I'm just using ICAP as an example, and I started sitting in the meetings because I was a counselor at the time, listening to people start the conversations, you started to hear the, another thing I get to do, or what's this going to be like, or just the eye rolls, or the, I'm just going to wait and see what this really is about. So you get all those things, and I get it. I do. I totally understand it, because I remember those days where we started talking about EOIs. And it's like, no, these are just tests. No, they become your world, right? OCCT, all those. And then what else? When, I had another acronym that I just thought about the other day that it was right when I started counseling, and I can't think of what it is right now. But it's thing after thing after thing, and it's like, well, who's going to do that? Oh, well, of course we know. Who? Counselors. Counselors can do that. But I don't believe ICAP is going to be that. I believe ICAP is going to be very purposeful. I believe that ICAP will incorporate lots of people in your building working together to help kids find success. And so that's what I'm really excited about. But I want you guys to remember, when we look forward to change, we can use courage or we can use that comfort, but we can't do both. So when we talk about college and career readiness as one of our components, one of the things that, this kind of does academic and college and career readiness, I get a lot of phone calls in my office about transcripts, how to document things on a transcript, also how do you put the correct language on it, but then also what does have to go on it as far as the assessments, because things have changed and all of that. One thing I want you to know is coming in the future, we're like in the, you got to get something approved, and then we're going to make sure it gets approved at another time. We're like in that fourth approval phase for a transcript documentation. And so that's going to be very helpful, I hope, to you guys. What I want it to have on it is everything that needs to go on the transcript, or everything that you wonder might go on the transcript. Because some people still call me and say, hey, we have to have CPR in the transcript, right? No, you don't have to have CPR in the transcript. You just have to keep the documentation at your school. So I want to define all of these things for you guys, because we have turnover in counselors, and here's what I don't love, is a lot of times counselors, when they're new, they may be the only person in their building, they might be the only counselor in their district, and sometimes they're one of a couple others, but they start out going, what do I need to know? Here's a packet of everything you need to know, and there's a lot. And so I want it to be very clean and concise, and so I have that transcript documentation coming soon. I also get a lot of questions about concurrent enrollment, and I want to make sure that's very descriptive on there. I have updated the website, and so I want you guys to check out the website, the counseling website. We will be updating the training and prevention side of it very quickly. But I have all the graduation checklists up to date, all the way to 2022, I believe. On the graduation checklist, it does talk a little bit on the back on the bottom about assessments and future ICAP requirements. Doesn't go into great depth, so if you have follow-up questions, please don't hesitate to call or email. But I do have those things up there. With concurrent enrollment, I get a lot of questions about how do we award grade? Is it weighted, unweighted? What do we count it as credit? You know, just different things like that. I am always willing to help, and if I don't know the answer, I will find you the answer, because the answer I have to give a lot is that's a local decision. That is a very local decision. My response back to a lot of counselors, because sometimes I get calls from superintendents, principals also asking these questions, but I want to say to you guys, if it's a question you are having because you are passionate about your kids and you're passionate about the credit they deserve and should get and the grades and things like that, if you want to call and ask me things, I am happy to help, and I'm also going to encourage you to advocate. Because we did have a situation not too long ago where the counselor she was for sure she was reading the law a certain way. And her superintendent was actually reading the law differently. So it encouraged us to sit down and have that conversation about that concurrent enrollment class. And so that was very fruitful for me, and it was also very educational. Because isn't that what we do in education? We have kids who are critical thinkers, and we want them to challenge us as counselors and as teachers and challenge us to think differently if we need to. And so that's always what I will encourage counselors to do, is to advocate for your students. Totally put yourself out there and ask the right questions about what they need. And one of the recommendations I will give while we're on this, have really descriptive documentation about what you're advising the kids in the current concurrent enrollment process. I understand that parents sign off on it. What I highly encourage you to do is have a documentation, whether it's email or an actual form that you keep on file, that says student expects to take blank class, which will count for blank credit. And you might even have your board policy about concurrent enrollment, transcripting and grading on it, and have parents and students sign it. This is only just an idea. I don't have one for you right now because it's just an idea that came in the recent weeks, when a student advocating for herself called my office. Well, she emailed me first, and then we spoke on the phone, and said, I was told I was going to get science credit for this class, and I'm not. And, you know, that kind of disrupts my planning. And obviously, she's a highly intelligent student because she's taking concurrent enrollment, but also she's calling the State Department of Education. And then I spoke with Dad and everything else. And this is just a recommendation that's come out of that. That doesn't mean you have to, and it also doesn't mean that some of you are not, or that you are doing it and I haven't noticed. I guess I'm just telling you this is something that I think parents would really appreciate, and I think kids would appreciate. Because parents will say to me, well, I guess I should have been more involved in the process. And I remind them, yes, please let your kid be that motivated go-getter, but also remember that they're still a child, and so they still need that assistance. So I highly encourage that. And if you don't know your board policy on concurrent enrollment, find your board policy on concurrent enrollment, because I think that's something that you need to be aware of so that you can advise families on that. Okay. We're going to go down to talk about the academic stuff. Okay, so this kind of goes into social emotional, but also academic. One of the things going on at the state level is our 4 working groups coming out of our ESSA plan, where we are working with the group Ready to Read, chronic absenteeism, feeding hungry kids, and then also working with our traumatized student. And why I believe this falls into the academic component is also in our discussions about trauma and being trauma informed, it's really important to continue to think about how that academically affects our kids. Has anyone in here, because I know I show it to everywhere I go, but other people may too, has anyone seen the Nadine Burke TED Talk about the child's brain and trauma? Okay, I got a few. Thank goodness. That's awesome. Okay, write that down, pen. I'm not telling you what to do. I'm just encouraging you. Dr. Nadine Burke, on her TED Talk, she talks about what's going on for kids when they have experienced trauma. And she talks about the brain, because what she is she's a pediatrician. And so she's going to talk language that you're not used to, because I wasn't used to it at first either, and I didn't always know exactly how does this fit with schools. But what I realized is she's helping you understand what your kid's brain is experiencing when they're trying to learn if they're a kid that's suffering from trauma. And hers is focused on chronic trauma, so more like the abuse and neglect and parent mental illness and such. But what she talks about is how the kid's brain is in fight, flight, or freeze on a regular basis. Think about the learning process when your body is in fight, flight, or freeze. It's hard to do, right? That's why I find this so important to talk to our teachers and to really educate our entire school about what kids are experiencing that have experienced trauma. And so at the state level, we're working with this trauma group, not because, hey, guess what? Kids have experienced trauma, and now what? We're really trying to have this working group to say, now what? What are we going to do as a state? How are we going to help our kids? I know districts request that I come out. Elizabeth and I come out and we talk to you about trauma-informed education, what you can do to help your kids who have experienced trauma or who are continuing to experience trauma. But the other part of that, because I really think there are 3 types of trauma. There's the chronic, which is the ACEs, the adverse childhood experiences. There's that, that's important, and that's totally what I see regularly in elementary and middle. And then also we're seeing the acute trauma. That's going to be our violence, our suicide, things that our kids are experiencing, tragic loss of a family member, and different situations like that. We see that all across the K-12 schools. And so there's a level of that, how to help and support kids academically. That's a component that we really have to focus on. And then also, something that I'm very passionate about, and that's secondary trauma, especially for my counselors. I mean it for everybody, all administrators, all teachers, but most importantly for our counselors. Because if you think about the stories you hear every day, that you take in, that you listen to, and you just walk out of that door every day and it magically disappears, it doesn't happen. And so how are you taking care of yourself, and how are you taking care of those relationships with your kids to know how to appropriately counsel them, to advise them in career and academic readiness? Because these 3 components aren't in isolation. You can't just do this, and you can't just do that, and you can't just do this. They're all going on. Because you need to understand what's going on for your kid who's experiencing social emotional trauma, or whatever it is, and how you can academically advise them. If you know what they're going through is going to last a while, and they want to take 4 AP courses their senior year, that might be a conversation you have with them if they weren't experiencing that traumatic situation. Or in the elementary level, experiencing or knowing what these kids are experiencing, and how do we help them? Are you involved in the placement of classes? Maybe you don't get choices. Maybe there's one first grade teacher for everybody. But are you able to do that input? Are you on the intervention team, whether you do RTI or you do some other process? Are you a part of that? Are you helping your overall process of supporting students? And one of the things I have talked about with new counselors, just when I was a counselor as well, saying, well, no, I haven't been asked. Advocate for yourself. because your kids need you. Your students need your voice because the only voice you ever have is your kid's voice. Rarely do you ever say to a principal or a teacher, I think this kid needs this, just because you thought it was a good idea that morning. It's because you've listened to that kid and you've heard what they believe about themselves and you heard what they need. And so I really want to continue the conversation when we're talking about how to help our traumatized students is, how are we doing it in the midst of having secondary trauma? And that goes into my soapbox of self-care. If I were to pass the microphone around the room right now and ask everybody in here, what did you do this weekend to care for yourself? I wonder how many people would say, I caught up on work, I shuffled my kids around town, I did my house cleaning, I made sure all my laundry was done. How many people would say, I stopped and I made sure I had a 1 hour uninterrupted time of anything I chose? How many people would say that? Yay, I have some. That's awesome. Good for you guys. That's awesome. That should be all of us, right? Because we have to take care of our needs. You counselors are doing like superhuman things every day, all day. And you're doing lunch duty too, right? So I just think that's important to remember when we're talking about academic success. I know that you still do those ins and outs of things that aren't your favorite, and I understand that, and I hope that we can continue to advocate to make sure that counselors are doing the work that they want to do. And so if you ever want to have more discussions and helpful, fruitful, professional development talk about that, I would love to. One thing I forgot to mention, at the back on the sticky pad, I put my Twitter handle. You know, I've tried for years to really get into Twitter and like put it out there. There's not a huge counselor following that I can find, but if you do want to follow me on Twitter, I put it back there because I do want to start pushing out information. I can give you newsletters and I can send those out from the state, but I also want to give you information quicker as it comes available. Like, oh, here's a great resource I just found on this. Please find this to be helpful. Or if you found something, I want you to be able to tag me in it and say, hey, I found this, and other counselors can get into it. Because one of the other things that I wanted to do, if we're in a smaller room, is I would give a lot more time for you to talk to the people at your table, because I want our counselors to network. I want you guys to know each other. I want Bennington schools to know Woodward, and I want Altus to know Miami, because everybody is doing a phenomenal job across the state, and they need to get to know each other. One of the things I know they do up in anyone, well, yeah, there's some Bristow people, but anyone else in the like Sapulpa area, that area, yeah, you guys do like a counseling group, don't you? Yeah. They like, how regularly do you meet? Not to put you on the spot. Once a month? 2 times a year. That's good too. 2 times a year. Oh, there's Terry. Okay. Yeah. So 2 times a year, they get together at like on an evening and have dinner and get to know each other and talk and collaborate and work. And it's not always work related, right? Like we talk about life and fun stuff too. I think that's awesome. I heard that back in the fall and thought, that's a great idea, because they had a Christmas dinner. And did you guys exchange gifts or something cute like that? I don't know. Anyway, it's fine. But the idea is that they're getting to know each other. And especially for you schools that you're the only one in your district, or you're the only one in your high school or elementary or whatever, it's really important to network. I really think so. So that's another component of Twitter and Facebook to really develop your PLN, right? Professional Learning Network. Because counselors are your best resource. What I found when I first got into the counseling field is there's just not a lot of us, and we're different. And every time something comes down, we're different. Like when the evaluation system came down, it was like, well, how are we going to apply? You know, how do I fit into this rubric and everything? So I really encourage you to work with your other counselors. Another conversation that continues to be very important in our social emotional world is talking about student mental health. And how many No, I'm not going to ask that. Okay. So I told you, spontaneous. Come up with a question, shoot it down. And that's what I like to do. One of the things that I have seen is that people are starting to have more conversations about how do we support our kids in their mental health concerns. You know, we have 504s, right? Yay. That's really, I mean, that's an advantage that our kids have, is that they can get access to a 504. But I also know that maybe there are times where we need a little bit more professional development about how to support kids, not necessarily counselors, but our teachers. And so if there's anything we can do as a State Department to help you or get you access to things you need, please let us know. Because we can have a resource for you to say, if you need something at maybe a faculty meeting or a professional development to teach your teachers about how to help these students, we want to. I know just coming out of a high school, coming from Norman High, I had teachers well-meaning teachers that would say, I just think this kid might be faking this anxiety. And you know what? Maybe they are and maybe they're not, but there's a reason they're faking if they are. So let's just talk about how we help these kids with anxiety and not diagnose whether or not it's true. So I think that's helpful. Also, I was starting to see that it became a medical thing. Anxiety-induced seizures. Do you guys have any of those kids? Not that you have to say or anything, but I'm starting to hear and see some of those things. So it's become, it's working with the collaboration of the nurse, the counselor, the teacher, the principal, all of those things together and really putting the support in place for these kids. Everybody wants to help kids, but the more we find out what we don't know, the more we need to realize, okay, we can find ways to help these kids. We just have to figure out the right resources. And that's what I want to be part of, and Elizabeth does too. Let's see. So the big picture, overall, when you think about what are you doing to, one of the things, this is just kind of the motto I have always lived by and I continue to live by. I'm going to do the best I can at what I'm good at, and I hope that that's what people want me to do. I always wanted to do the best at being there for my kids and helping them through situations and coordinating services for them and networking with teachers and really stepping up. One of the things I love to do, which you guys are probably going to hate me after this, I loved doing lunch duty. It was like my favorite thing because I could just talk to kids. I could get to see what they do and how they work together and the way they acted. And it came every day at that time at 11:30. I was excited to go see my kids at lunch. And so people kept asking me to do lunch duty, of course, right? And that was fine because it was something I liked, but it was also something I became really good at. And by good, I mean I used it to my advantage. That's how I got to know my kids. That's how I got to see how they worked together or who didn't work together very well, or maybe who only had one or two things in their lunchbox and I needed to start saying, hey, can we get you some more food? Or the kid who never had money in his account and kept getting turned away. So my point in telling you that is find opportunities in your building where you can get good at it, but it's also something that will benefit your kids because people will ask you to do the things you're best at. And if you're really good at responding to crisis, that can be exhausting. So if you really are good at that, and that's what everybody asks you to do, find some partners in that one because that's really hard to continue to do by yourself. But the big picture of accountability and delivery system and foundation and management system. One of the things I want to do in the future with our comprehensive plan is really break those down and talk about how do you prove yourself? How do you prove the hard work that you do every day? Because it's not lost that that's what you're doing. It's not in this room, and I hope you know it's not across the state, but what I find is it's really important for our administrators to know what you're doing. How many of you have an administrator that was a former counselor? Okay, we do have a few, which is awesome. But that's not the majority. And so when your administrators are guiding you, they've never walked in your shoes. So when they stand up and they talk to their teachers, they've walked in those shoes. They've done that. That was their life. They didn't do that for you. They didn't know how to be a counselor. They don't know how to be a counselor. And so when I say advocate for yourself, let your principal and your administrators know what you do best and how you can best serve your kids. And so in our comprehensive plan, I hope to really help you guys have tools and strategies to do that, because you have to be your own voice. But really, you're being the voice for your kids to say, this is what kids need. They need counselors. They need more counselors, but you know what? If I can't give you more counselors, at least let me give you more of myself. But let me make sure I'm giving you more of myself that's effective and appropriate and worthy. So one of the questions that, I guess I should have put it up here, but it's okay. I want feedback from you guys on an ongoing basis. Let me know where you need support, how you need support, and what we can do to help you. I don't know what's going on in Sulphur, Oklahoma, unless somebody tells me. I don't know what's going on in Guyman. I'm going there soon, so I'm going to know then. But I'm not going to know unless I hear from you guys. So please don't ever hesitate to email me. Pick up the phone and call me and say, hey, I think these are things that we really need. I obviously came from a high school not too long ago, but what my district in Norman had is going to be different what you guys have, and so I need to know what the gaps are and how to fill them. So I know that I'm a speaker right before lunch, and I know how excited you are about lunch, but before we leave, I want to know if you guys have any questions. Yes, we do. Okay. And don't get mad at her, because you still have a few minutes.
Well, me and my principal had been talking about this. I wish we can offer parenting class. We have so many parents coming and crying because they don't know what to do with their kids, and we have to work as a community, and we're doing our part, but they don't know what to do. They're all alone at home. So many kids is raising by grandparents. There is a technology thing. You know, I wish we can offer, of course, we will not call parenting class. Nobody will show up. But something, you know, this is the core. That's the problem is coming, because kids are raising kids these days, or single moms working 2 jobs. They don't know what to do, and we do our part at school, but it's just not enough. And it's something, I really think that they just don't know how to raise kids. They don't know how to discipline. It's, I think that is the thing that we need to work on. And I've been in training in Love and Logic, and absolutely love it. And I will love to, I mean, I pay for myself to go to training, but there is something that we're not looking into. We're always focusing on what can we do, but we need to think about the parents too. They need to be involved somehow.
I love that question. I'm glad you asked that. Here's a couple things that I know. I have a master's degree in human development and family science and a specialization in marriage and family therapy, and I can't tell you how many Google searches I've done on parenting, how many books I have read on marriage. Bless my husband's heart. And I have all the training in the world, and I'm still struggling. So we know that our parents who aren't educated in parenting are still struggling. One of the main reasons that we brought Elizabeth on board is because what she has to offer is very different than what I have to offer. She has, her focus is on, it's on prevention, but what's your master's? She's public health. So she's not been a counselor. And I say that not to discredit her, because I want that balance. Because how we got to know each other was when I was working at Norman High, she came to me and she said, Kristen, here's a plan for prevention for your entire community. And I was like, what? She's like, I want to do these parent meetings. I want to work with these students, and I want these sports involved. I want to do meetings with coaches. And I was just like, okay, come on. And so then I stole her from the Women's Resource Center in Norman and brought her up to the state. So that's what she wants to do. She wants to help schools have a whole prevention program to say, this is how you help your parents. This is how you help your faculty. These are things that kids need. These are things your clubs and organizations need, with all types of topics. Bullying, harassment, mental health, trauma, sexual assault, healthy relationships. It goes on forever. But she really wants to have, and she will, like at Engage this summer, she'll be presenting on those prevention programs and different approaches that she has in mind. So that is something that's coming, because the other part is we sat down with our executive director of Family and Community Engagement the other day, Sonia Johnson, at the State Department, and we talked about that too. How do we continue to engage our families and our parents in these conversations? Because it's not just the school's fault. It's not just the parents' fault. It's not just the neighborhood they're raised in. It's all of us working together to make sure we're wrapping around the kid and supporting him. We're educated in kids, so we need to continue to educate our parents in what our kids are experiencing. I say, and even with the technology, I like that you brought that up. Elizabeth and I recently were in a meeting, and the recommendation, was that just take the phones away from the kids. And we were like, no. We can't do that. We have to teach them how to use the phone. Well, half the time, they're teaching us how to use the phone. So there's problem number one. What I heard the other day, I heard this last Thursday at the COSA Women in School Leadership Conference, we are digital immigrants trying to teach digital natives. And I was like, that's so profound. Again, going back to my high school days, we had one computer in our home that sat in the living room that was dial-up with AOL. No cell phones. We had landlines. Elizabeth and I went and talked to some OU students the other day. We were like, I said landlines. Elizabeth's a lot younger than me. And I was like, do you guys know what a landline is? You pick it up from the wall. And they're like, what? So we're digital immigrants, and we're trying to teach digital natives safety in technology. And that's okay. We're going to do it. We're still going to teach them healthy boundaries because we're the adult, and that's what we need to do. But I think classes like that are important. Elizabeth and I are very passionate about making sure that our parents feel welcomed in a school, because you can host a parent night all the time, but if your parents don't feel comfortable coming in your doors, they're never coming. Even if you give free hot dogs and free pizza and free ice cream, they might come for the hot dog and the ice cream, but they're not going to listen to you. So we have to make sure that our parents feel supported walking in our school. One of the things we talked about in Norman was how to recruit diverse teachers. And one of our administrators said, why would diverse people want to go back to a school and teach where they never even felt welcomed? And so it starts at taking care of kids now in diversity in different situations, low SES, racial barriers, religious barriers, whatever they are, and just treating kids and loving them for who they are and what they are, and hoping that they do come back one day and they be that teacher, they be that counselor, and they represent diversity in our state. So those are definitely things that Elizabeth and I want to continue. It is 11:43. I have technically 7 minutes. Do we have any other questions before everybody runs out to their uninterrupted lunch that they get to do, or the 12 errands that they will run? No questions? Okay. Thank you guys for being here. Have a great lunch together.